I'm Elizabeth at A Literary Princess. If you are new here, welcome. I have a PhD in English literature with a focus on Victorian women novelists, and as you might expect, I love to read. Today I have another Jane Austen July video for you, and it is based on the work of nonfiction that I chose to read this month, What Jane Austen's Characters Read and Why by Susan Allen Ford. This book goes through Jane Austen's novels and talks about the books that are read by characters, alluded to, or referenced by the narrator, or books that are not read by characters in some cases, in many cases actually. And why does Jane Austen bring in these specific works? So I thought that it would be fun to make a note of all of the works that Ford talks about and see how many of these have I actually read. Spoiler alert, it's not a whole lot of them. But now I have a rather extensive reading list. So we are going to go through the books in the order that Ford goes through them in, which is roughly the order that Jane Austen first put them out for publication, meaning that we actually start with Northanger Abbey, even though Northanger Abbey was not ultimately published until after her death. I hope that makes sense. So we have a lot to get through because, spoiler alert, Jane Austen's characters read a lot. So let's jump in. So as I said, we start off with Northanger Abbey, which, though it was not published until after her death in 1818, was actually the first novel that she sent off for publication. So, Northanger Abbey, if you don't know, largely is a satire on the Gothic novel, and therefore there is a lot of novels referenced in this book. And I'm just going to go in the order of the books as they came up in Ford's book. So first of all, we have Cecilia by Frances Burney, which I have in fact read, and this actually comes up multiple times. So for ones that come up multiple times, I will mention them each time, but you know, obviously I will have already said that I read it. I actually loved this. This is my favorite of Burney's books. I've read 3 out of her 4, and it's so good. We then have Belinda by Maria Edgeworth, which I have also read and also really love. This is such a good one. And Camilla by Frances Burney, which I have also read and also will be coming up again later in the video, because Jane Austen was actually one of the subscribers for this book. So in order to publish Camilla, Frances Burney did it by subscription, so people would like pledge money basically, and then the subscribers were listed in the book when it was published, and they all got a copy, and Jane Austen was one of them. So she references this several times. We now have one that I have not read. This is Sir Charles Grandison by Samuel Richardson. This was a favorite of Austen's. I have not read it yet, although we will be talking about Richardson again several times. And now we get into the Gothic novels. And first up is, of course, The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe, which is referenced constantly throughout Northanger Abbey. And I have read this. I do need to reread it because it was a while ago. It's good, but it's very long. Another Anne Radcliffe book, The Italian. I also have read this. I actually read it just last year for my 18th century novel project, and I really enjoyed this. I actually think this is the better of the Anne Radcliffe novels between Udolpho and The Italian. The Italian, A, is shorter and more succinct, but also just some really good characterization of the villain. The Castle of Wolfenbach by Eliza Parsons. I have not read this one, although it has actually been on my TBR for, like, since I first read Northanger Abbey, which for reference was in my senior year of high school, so I would have been 17, and I'm about to turn 33, so it's been there for a while. You can't really find it very easily, and that's actually the case for a lot of these. They're not like in print by a regular publisher, so I can probably find free version online though. Claremont by Regina Maria Roach. Roche? Hopefully there'll be a cover here with her name on it. Probably Roche. I have not read this one either. The Mysterious Warning, also by Eliza Parsons. I have not read this one. The Necromancer, or A Tale of the Black Forest, by Lawrence Flammenberg, which was a pseudonym for Carl Frederick Callert. I have not read this one. The Midnight Bell by Francis Latham. Nope. The Orphan of the Rhine by Eleanor Sleeth. Also no. And Horrid Mysteries, edited by Peter Will, which is an abridged version of The Genius by Carl Gross. I have not read either the abridged version or the full version. Again, the only reason I even know any of these titles is Northanger Abbey. One that is more familiar, The Monk by Matthew Lewis. This is a very classic Gothic novel. I actually have not read it yet, though. Finally, back to one that I have read, The History of Tom Jones by Henry Fielding. I also read this for my 18th century novel project and was like kind of surprised by how much I did enjoy it. It wasn't perfect, it was 3 stars, but there was a good story there. We then have 2 essays that are alluded to, not by exact title, but one of them, the actual number, like issue number, is mentioned, and then the other one, Ford kind of oh my god, hypothesizes that it is probably this one. So the first of those is a letter in The Rambler that Samuel Richardson wrote. It was in volume 97, number 2 of The Rambler, and it was later published under the title Coquetry. I have not read that. And then the other is an essay in The Mirror, which Ford thinks is likely A Father's Legacy to His Daughters, written by Henry Mackenzie under the name John Homespun, or perhaps one of the follow-up pieces. So there is Northanger Abbey. Let's move on to Sense and Sensibility, which is the actual first published of Jane Austen's novels, in a year that it doesn't say on the back, because that would be useful. Is it 1811? I feel like it's 1811. So Sense and Sensibility largely talks about poetry, because Marianne is big on sentimental poets, and she has 3 poets who are her favorites. I don't think there's any specific titles mentioned. If there were, I didn't write them down. But we are going to see 2 of these 3 later on in the course of this video, because, shocker, they were some of Austen's favorites as well. First is James Thomson, who I am not familiar with at all. Second is William Cooper, despite the fact that it is spelled Cowper, but pronounced Cooper. Okay. He was like probably Jane Austen's favorite poet, and we'll be seeing him again a few times. But I also have not read anything by him. And then we have Sir Walter Scott. Now, I actually have read something by Scott, but it is one of his novels, Waverley, not his poetry. So, like, that doesn't count. But I'm gonna put it on my stack anyway. We then have 2 Shakespeare plays. First is Romeo and Juliet, which is not referenced by title, but Austen makes a reference to Queen Mab, which Ford believes is most likely to be referencing the famous speech in Shakespeare by Mercutio. I have read Romeo and Juliet several times. The second one is Hamlet, again, William Shakespeare, which is being read aloud by the Dashwoods and Willoughby, and I have read Hamlet twice and seen it live. Very good live. And then finally, we have a novel called Columella by Richard Graves. This is referenced by Mrs. Dashwood. I have not read this. I had not heard of this until Ford's book. Obviously, it's in Sense and Sensibility. I did not catch that reference in any of the many times I've read Sense and Sensibility, but Now I'm curious to check it out now. Moving on to Pride and Prejudice from 1813, which we actually only have 3 works for. I think this is the book that has the least references or allusions to other works of literature, which is very interesting. There's some scenes where books are mentioned, like somebody is reading, but there's nothing to be able to tell what those books are. The first one here is the only one that is actually referenced by title, and this is Sermons to Young Women by James Fordyce, which Lydia rather famously yawns at when Mr. Collins starts reading it to them. I have not read this. And then 2 that are alluded to, the first is Letters on the Improvement of the Mind by Hester Chapone, which Ford sees as a very big influence on the overall structure and plot of the book. I've not read this. I actually am very curious to, though. Hester Chapone was part of the Blue Stockings group. And then we have Addresses to Young Men, also by James Fordyce, which I have also not read. We go to Mansfield Park from 1814, this year's group read, which I just finished a few days ago, I guess. And this, along with Northanger Abbey, probably have the most literary references because they are performing a play here. And they spend a lot of time trying to figure out exactly which play are they going to perform. And the first one that I have is the play that they do, attempt to perform. They never actually manage to perform it. Lover's Vows by Elizabeth Inchbald. So this is a translation / adaptation of August von Kotzebue's Das Kinderliebe. I'm gonna have that over here somewhere, 'cause I don't speak German. So I actually have read this. I read this this year to go along with Mansfield Park as my pick for something that was written by one of Jane Austen's contemporaries, and I cannot recommend reading it enough. It really adds a new important layer to Mansfield Park that I feel like I've been missing on my other reads of Mansfield Park. So I'm really glad that I read it. Now for the plays that were rejected, and there are a lot of them. First of all, we have Macbeth by William Shakespeare, which I have read, and I'm actually hoping to reread this year for Shakespeare. Hamlet is once again referenced, and yes, I've read that. Othello by William Shakespeare, I have read that. And we have a bunch that I have not read. Douglas by John Home, nope. The Gamester by Edward Moore, nope. The Rivals by Richard Sheridan, which I have at least heard of, as well as The School for Scandal by Richard Sheridan, also heard of, never read either of them. The Wheel of Fortune by Richard Cumberland, nope. The Heir at Law by George Coleman the Younger, okay, nope, haven't read it. And then William the Eighth by William Shakespeare. I actually have not read this one. I don't know why, but I feel like everybody always mentions how boring Henry VIII is. Like for one of Shakespeare's plays, like it's not the most interesting of the histories. But I do want to read all the histories, so I will eventually read this. And we have 2 books that Ford believes are alluded to, though not referenced by title. Lectures on the Art of Reading by Thomas Sheridan, and Lectures on Rhetoric and Belles Lettres by Hugh Blair. I have not read either of these. Now we get into the books that are in Fanny's little East Room, and we have 2 poems by William Cooper again, The Task and Tirocinium, which will hopefully be somewhere up here. I haven't read any Cooper, so neither of these. He also has Tales by George Crabbe, which I have not read. The Idler Essays by Samuel Johnson. I have not read anything by Samuel Johnson, and he's like one of the biggest names in the 18th century, and I really probably should have included him in the 18th century novel project with a book that's going to be mentioned in a few moments, but I didn't, so. He's better known for his nonfiction, though, I feel like. And then there is an unnamed book that is dealing with Lord Macartney's voyage to China. And Ford gives several possibilities for what this could have been, because apparently there were a lot of them. But one possibility is Lord Macartney's journal of the embassy to China, which I've not read that, and I haven't read anything to do with it. I actually know nothing about this little piece of history, so. And then we just have a few others that are referenced throughout the book. Paradise Lost by John Milton, which I have read, finally. I feel like we just went through a lot of things I haven't read. But I've actually read this twice, and it's really good. It's really great. There is a reference to Voltaire. I don't think it actually said which work, but I do have Candide here to hold up. But I have actually not read it yet, so I've not read anything by Voltaire. And A Pipe of Tobacco by Sir Isaac Hawkins Brown. I had never heard of this. Je ne sais quoi by William Whitehead. Had never heard of that either. Those last four are all mentioned by the two Crawford siblings. And then we have another book by Samuel Johnson, Rasselas, which is his novel, which I have heard of. It's also mentioned in Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, but I have never read it. Moving on to Emma from 1815. One of the saddest things I think about this book, in reference to other works of literature, is Mr. Knightley talks about all these great reading lists that Emma made but never actually read from, but we don't get to know what's on the reading lists for the most part, which is sad, but that's okay. So first up, Elegant Extracts, edited by, and this is a name, oh my god, this is a name, Vicemus Knox. And this was just a collection of passages from other works of literature, I guess. But I'd never heard of this before. And I'm still stuck on the name Vicemus Knox. It'll be up here somewhere, hopefully. And then one that I have read, yay! The Vicar of Wakefield by Oliver Goldsmith. I read this for the 18th Century Novel Project last year as well. And this is referenced as one of the only books that Robert Martin, who proposes to Harriet Smith, has read. And then we have two Gothic novels that Harriet really likes. The Romance of the Forest by Anne Radcliffe, which I have not read, but I do want to read most of Radcliffe's works, if not all. And then The Children of the Abbey by Regina Maria Roche. And then the final one mentioned in Emma is Adelaide and Theodore by Stephanie Félicité Madame de Genlis. So this was translated into English, and it sounds like it's kind of like instructions on educating children, but in the form of a epistolary novel. I am kind of curious to check it out. And then Persuasion, published posthumously in 1818. So the first book that we get mentioned in Persuasion, we have very long passage about, and it is actually The Baronetage, which is just a book giving the history and the names of all the baronets in England. And Anne Elliot's father, Sir Walter, is obsessed with it. I have not read it. I don't think many people have probably read this in this day and age. Because it doesn't sound like it would be super interesting, but it is referenced quite frequently, so had to put it in here. We then have two Walter Scott poems, Marmion and The Lady of the Lake. I have not read either of them. Again, no Scott poetry. And then we have three by Lord Byron. And I'm probably gonna butcher the names of all of these. The Giaour, The Brides of Abydos, and The Corsair. I have not read any of these. I have read poetry by Lord Byron, but these, from my understanding, are some of his long narrative poems, and I have not read those. I've read more of his shorter works, although I think I did read Childe Harold. Did I? I think I did. Who knows? But yeah, mostly his shorter works like She Walks in Beauty and Darkness, which are not the ones being referenced here. So, another narrative poem that I do not know, Henry and Emma by Matthew Prior. Cecilia again by Frances Burney. Yay, I've read it, making me feel better. And then finally, The Arabian Nights, or The 1001 Nights. I actually haven't read anything from this, which is hard to believe because I feel like it's a big, like one of those big texts that's constantly referenced. I have a Kindle copy, but I've never actually read anything from it. Finally, we have Jane Austen's unfinished novel, Sanditon, which I have here in a bind-up with Lady Susan and the Watsons. Now, you would think that like this wouldn't have that many literary references because it's literally 12 chapters and it's unfinished, but there are actually quite a few. So, and this was obviously never finished, but it was later published in 1871 by her nephew. By her nephew? That was by somebody. Hi, Pepin. So first of all, to make me feel good, one that we've already talked about, Camilla by Frances Burney, which I've read. We then have a poem by William Cooper again. This is Truth. Still no Cooper. More Walter Scott with Marmion and the Lady of the Lake. Nope, haven't read him still. Then Robert Burns, also a poet who I am not at all familiar with and have not read. James Montgomery, same thing, not familiar, haven't read. But then a poet that I have read, William Wordsworth. I have here The Prelude, which is his incredibly long autobiographical narrative poem, which I have not read all of. I have read part of it, one of the books of it. But I have also read quite a few of his other works, including Tintern Abbey and I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, and several more. I used to have a little collection of his poems, but I don't have that anymore. But yes, Wordsworth. I've read him, I've taught him as well. The Pleasures of Hope by Thomas Campbell, which I'd never heard of and do not know and have not read. And then finally, the final mention is just the novels of Samuel Richardson, of which there are 3. Now, there is in addition to just the mention of the novels of Richardson, there is a specific reference to his novel Clarissa, using a character name. I have not read Clarissa. It is very, very long. And then Sir Charles Grandison we already talked about, but I have read Pamela, which is his first novel, and which I read last year for the 18th Century Novel Project. How many of these have I read? So, only counting the ones that come up multiple times, I have read 15 out of these many, many works that were mentioned. So, I mean, not a huge amount, but like, that's respectable. I feel like that's a respectable amount. Again, my reading list has expanded very much now, especially some of these Gothic novels from Northanger Abbey I'm really curious about. And also some of these poets like William Cooper, I really do want to pick up. And the Letters on the Improvement of the Mind by Hester Chapone. I'm very curious about that one as well. I really highly recommend checking out What Jane Austen's Characters Read and Why. It is a really fascinating book. It is on the more academic end of things. Susan Allen Ford is an academic, but I feel like it just provides a deeper reading of all of the novels to understand what these references are and why she is bringing them up. So let me know down in the comments, have you read any of these books that are mentioned in Jane Austen's works? What did you think of them? Are you familiar with some of the more obscure ones? And How were they? Like, especially these Gothic novels. I'm so curious about the Gothic novels. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see more of my bookish content. It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.